What struck me in this week's Torah portion was the verse where he speaks of disciplining like a son. So I've titled this, The Discipline of the Son. The scripture readings this week, Aikev and the Haftorah that you just heard from Isaiah 49, have far-reaching echoes for those who live in covenant with the one true God. The greater motif of this Torah portion, to quote Rabbi J.H. Hertz of blessed memory, he said, this Torah portion stresses the vital duty for Israel to maintain its spiritual identity in the face of Canaanite idolatry. The emphasis is total dependence on God and continuing to remember the words from last week's Torah portion, you who cling to the Lord are all alive today. And towards the end of Moses' masterpiece of writing that we know as Devarim or Deuteronomy, he says, these are not idle words for you. They are your very life. And by them you will live long in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess. Both the Haftorah and the Torah also challenge us to understand this idea of divine discipline, of suffering, and how it benefits us and draws us closer to God. As this Torah portion says in chapter 8, verse 5, bear in mind that Adonai Elohecha, the Lord your God, disciplines you just as a man disciplines his son. God's temporary discipline is designed to help us remember our identity in him. It's not a permanent alienation of affection from him. It is an integral part of the father-son relationship. We have come through 3 weeks of admonition, culminating in the great destruction of the house of God on Tisha B'Av, a time of severe correction and stark discipline. We are now in the 3rd week of the weeks of consolation, where the Father, having disciplined, is now comforting, reassuring, and helping his Son to learn the lessons of the discipline. One of these lessons is keeping our identity in him rather than in the world. Even when exiled, far from our native home, to remember who he is and how we are his and only his, even as we sojourn in a world that wants to take our hearts captive and break our family ties with God. Another lesson is God's steadfast faithfulness, even in the aftermath of such stark discipline as the destruction of the temple. Because the enduring and eternal truth that shines like a beacon to the world is the eternal covenant of grace between God and his treasured people. Today I hope to show how Parsha Aikev and Isaiah 49 and Yeshua's ministry are linked, to expand our understanding of the relationship of our identity, the Son's identity, and the role of discipline in the redemptive mission of Yeshua. To show how all this together helps us to join into God's, as he put it, Am Segulah, his treasured people. And through all this, the restoration of mankind to its glorified state as it once envisioned in the Garden of Eden. Within the rich, life-giving words of Parsha Aikev is a description of God's relationship to his Am Segulah. His people must live in the way that God has commanded them. The hard discipline of Tisha B'Av have driven this point home. He says it will be because, that's what this word Aikev is translated as, because you listen, Tishme'un, to his mishpatim, because you carefully observe them, ushmartem, carefully observe them, that God will remember the covenant he made on oath to your fathers. That was in chapter 7, verse 12. These words of the Sinaitic covenant sound conditional, but do remember that the covenant, what that covenant is founded on. That covenant is founded on the Abrahamic covenant, the covenant between the parts in Genesis 15, which assigned the land to Israel, and the covenant described in Genesis 17, which said in part at verse 7, yes, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, in order to be your God and your seed's God after you. In other words, a unilateral, unconditional, and eternal covenant, which is another way of saying God's grace alone. But this covenantal relationship we are in with him means that we must live according to his ways. This covenant of grace is for our own good. It is meant to transform us from slaves to the world or slaves to the flesh into servants of the living God. Thus, in this section of Devarim, we hear over and over how he demands that we fear, reverence him, walk only in his paths, Deuteronomy 10:12, love and serve him, bechol levavchem uvechol nafshechem, with all of your heart and all of your soul, which occurs in this Torah portion at Deuteronomy 11:14. And I'm sure those words sound familiar to you, as they are a part of the Ve'ahavta that we say each Shabbat. But if you listen carefully, you notice there's a little difference in them than the ones we say in the Ve'ahavta. Levavchem, nafshechem, they end differently. And that's because in the Ve'ahavta that we say from Deuteronomy 6:5, they are in the singular form. You shall love. They are being spoken to each individual person. But in this part of the Torah, they are being spoken to Israel as a collective group of hearts and souls, as God's chosen people group. Therefore, they change person and number to second person plural. You all shall love the Lord your God with you all's hearts and with you all's souls. Sounding very much like he lived in Texas for a while. The English language lacks that declaration of second person plural, so the Southerners made up for it and put it back in. Y'all. So that's proper English. Entering into covenant with God means that you are his and his alone. One becomes a servant of God and leaves behind bondage to a fallen world. Entering into this covenant for Israel happened when God took them out of Egypt, and they stood before the smoking mountain and said, all that you say we will do. It was really an affirmation, a renewal, and an expansion of that unconditional Abrahamic covenant. Similarly, once Yeshua died and rose again and ascended to heaven, that covenantal relationship was once again renewed and expanded and reaffirmed. But it was more than just renewed with the physical descendants of Israel alone. By Yeshua's command, something new happened. That covenantal relationship was now opened up to, as it said, all the families of the world, just as God had promised to Abraham. Altogether, these are in a line of covenants: the covenant with Abraham, the covenant on Mount Sinai with Israel, and now added to that line of covenants is the Brit Chadashah, the new and renewed covenant in the blood of Yeshua, open to all human hearts that are so moved to enter it. The point being that now in Yeshua, we have our identity in him personally, and we have a collective identity in him also. In But in both ways, we only have identity in him, whether personal or collective. We are each children of the living God, and we are collectively his mixed flock, as he himself said in John chapter 10, verses 14 through 16. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep, and I have other sheep that are not from this fold. Those also I must lead, and they will listen to my voice. So there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The identity of these two distinct flocks now overlaps and intermingles in their shared allegiance to the one shepherd. They still have their identities, but now they're together in one flock. A shepherd leads his flock along paths to take them to pasture where they are fed. The same paths that are mentioned here in Deuteronomy 10:12. What are these paths? What are his paths that he wants us to walk in? I think it's important to look at the wording of that section in Deuteronomy to understand. Not only are we to keep his commandments and statutes, that's in 10 verse 13, but we are to remember that it is to God who belongs all the heavens and the earth, everything that is on it, and that he has chosen Israel and his lineal descendants and those grafted into the tree of Israel. And earlier we were reminded that it's not because of anything special about us in particular. It was simply his to choose. And so in verse 16 of chapter 10, it says, circumcise your hearts and stop being stiff-necked. You must not be stubbornly unable to be sensitive. We were talking about this in my class today. Circumcise your heart. Be sensitive to others. We must be sensitive to the way our Father in heaven is sensitive and able to empathize. And what are we supposed to empathize with? It's what he said in this verse. Uphold the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and befriend the stranger, providing him with food and clothing, because you yourselves were strangers in Egypt. And I just wonder if there's a possible subtext. Because you saw how pagans treat strangers. Don't treat people that way. Israel must keep the commandments, sure, but that alone is not enough. If we are going to have our identity in him, then we must live like him. As he said in Leviticus, you must be holy, for I am holy. And Yeshua teaches exactly this when he admonishes certain Pharisees in Matthew 23:23. You tithe mint and dill and cumin, yet you have neglected the weightier matters of Torah, justice and mercy and faithfulness. It is necessary to do these things without neglecting the others. So you see, it's an all-encompassing expectation. Keep the commandments and seek justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Keeping the commandments is the basic expectation for the children of Israel. What God is looking for are circumcised hearts that do not neglect the widow and the orphan, who look after the strangers who dwell in their country. Hearts that seek justice, display mercy, and abound in faithfulness. This is a key identifying factor for the people who are in covenant with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is what gives us our distinct identity. This is what is supposed to set us apart from the rest of the fallen world. This is what the Good Shepherd expects of us, no matter which flock or fold we came from. Yeshua said these things, and it must be, as he said, that we must listen to his voice. Now let's spend a little time looking at Yeshua through his voice, which spoke both through Isaiah and the gospel texts. This Haftarah from the middle verses of Isaiah 49. But the beginning verse of it tells us something about who is speaking through the vessel of Isaiah. So here I'm going to read a little bit of the first part of Isaiah 49 that you didn't hear yet today. And you'll get an idea of who's speaking. The translation comes from the JPS Tanakh. Listen, O coastlands, to me, and give heed, O nations afar. God appointed me before I was born, naming me while I was in my mother's womb. My mouth was made to be like a sharpened blade while I was hidden in the shadow of a divine hand, so that I was like a polished arrow concealed in God's quiver. And God said to me, you are my servant, Israel, in whom I glory. I thought, I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for empty breath. But my case rested with God. My recompense was in the hands of my God. And now God has resolved, the one who formed me in the womb to be of service, to bring back Jacob and restore Israel. And I have been honored in the sight of God. My God has been my strength. And God has said, it is too little that you should be my servant, that in that I raise up the tribes of Jacob and restore the survivors of Israel. I will also make you a light of the nations, that my salvation may reach the ends of the earth. You hear what voice is coming through Isaiah? Let's dig into it a bit. Who is the audience? He says, coastlands and distant nations. God is proclaiming something to the world. See, he's going beyond Israel. He's proclaiming something to the world. And we'll see in a moment what that is. This voice speaking through Isaiah existed before the physical existence that comes with birth. See how it's talking about before he formed me? He was alive before he was born. This person who's speaking through Isaiah was named while still in the womb. Spoiler alert, there are only a few candidates for this. And only one that really fits everything, that is Yeshua, the angel saying to Miriam, he shall be called Emmanuel, God with us. He was named before the womb. But wait, the voice identifies him here. You are my servant Israel, in whom I'm glory. This voice is saying, you are my servant Israel, in whom I glory. So this text says that Israel is the servant. Hold that thought a moment. We don't want to get confused. Hold that thought a moment. It goes on to say, the one who formed me in the womb to be of service, to bring back Jacob and restore Israel. Okay, this is a little weird, isn't it? How can this be? My servant Israel is to bring back Jacob and restore Israel? This is poetic language. So don't expect it to be straightforward prose. The language is in the subtext. The message is just beneath the surface of the words. Just as the name Jacob and Israel don't strictly mean only one person, Jacob, who was also called Israel, they are the names that stand for a whole people group. Jacob means all of his offspring, and Israel doubly emphasizes this by talking about what later would become the northern tribes. The two names together mean all of the living souls descended from Jacob. So is this saying Israel is going to save the Jewish people? No, it's actually saying the servant is. So we can draw the conclusion that the servant is equivalent to all Israel. The Messiah is the greatest representative of the sons of Jacob. It is the Messiah's job to bring back Jacob and restore Israel. But wait, and this is, I know, starting to sound like an infomercial. I apologize. There's more. It's not enough for the Messiah to bring back Jacob and restore Israel. He has also been made by God to be a light of the nations, that God's salvation will reach to the ends of the earth. Now you see how Yeshua's good shepherd metaphor was founded on the words of Isaiah 49, wasn't it? He gathers his flock and he gathers still more sheep not of this fold. Thus, God saying, my salvation, Yeshua T, will reach to the ends of the earth. From the perspective of Jerusalem, Tucson is Od Ketzeh Haaretz, the ends of the earth. Thus, as we stand in Tucson and share the Jewish Messiah, we are fulfilling this prophecy each and every week. Now that we have established that Messiah is equivalent to all Israel and her greatest representative, let's continue in Isaiah 49 with some of the verses that you already heard today. Because now a new voice is channeled through the prophet. And it is actually the voice of a mother. That mother is Jerusalem, known as Zion. It actually becomes a conversation between the servant and the mother, Jerusalem, which is equivalent to a conversation between Israel and his mother. He's saying that she is saying, this voice of the mother is saying, she feels forsaken by God and forgotten. This is how she began feeling on the 10th of Av, Esrei B'Av, the day after Tisha B'Av, the day after the destruction in the year 70 CE. Destroyed, and her inhabitants, her children, all gone. Tragedy struck, and until 1948, she sat forsaken and apparently forgotten. But her very special son, the one charged with the regathering of Jacob and Israel, says to her that he could never forget her. He comforts her in his words. He says, even if a mother was able to forget her child, I could never forget you. Jerusalem, I could never forget you. Then he utters these iconic words which strike the heart so profoundly. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands, and your walls are ever before me. The same hands spoken of in Psalm 22, if you remember my little sermon series a while ago about Psalm 22. Some people doubt this crucifixion of the Messiah. Don't worry, they are not alone. In John chapter 20, Thomas, called Didymus, the twin, also doubted until Yeshua told him to put his finger in the holes in his hand that came from the nails. These are the marks engraved on his hands, which were spoken of through the prophet Isaiah. This was his voice speaking to his mother, Jerusalem. The things that are known, these things that the marks on the hand are known in certain circles as the stigmata. They are, as Isaiah 49 tells us, engraved in order to keep the memory of Jerusalem and her walls ever before the Messiah. The servant who has worked in the spiritual realm all these centuries to bring back the exile and to comfort Jerusalem. Yeshua, the Messiah, is the spiritual force behind the regathering of the children of Israel. The spiritual force behind the establishment of Israel before our very eyes in 1948. The struggle for the restoration of Israel that is going on right now is a messianic struggle. It is focused on Israel, but the intent is that it will ultimately bring the light to the nations, and it will shine brightly from Jerusalem when all that is said in prophecy is accomplished. Now let's consider how these hands became engraved. That is, of course, through destruction on the cruel Roman torture stake that we all call the cross. The Messiah who stands for all Israel, remember? He stands for all Israel. He came into the world, which was created through him, according to John. And he was cruelly oppressed. Finally, he was killed by the judgment of the Roman leader and the cruelty of the Roman soldiers based on the false testimony of a handful of Jewish leaders that felt threatened by his authority. And he was crushed and left for dead. His fate is the same fate that Jerusalem underwent, destroyed by the judgment of a Roman leader and torn stone and timber from timber by the fury and the cruel brutality of the Roman army. Left for dead as a pile of rubble. As Yeshua said, not one stone left standing upon the other. But they could not keep Yeshua dead. He rose again and ascended to the Father in heaven. So too, Jerusalem could not remain dead. She too was resurrected in 1967. And when she opened her eyes after 1900 years, she saw life in her streets. She saw an Israeli army that God had favored. And the voice of Yeshua speaking through the prophet said to her, "Look up all around you and see. They are all assembled, are come to you as I live, declares Adonai." He said it right there. Remember that Yeshua is the greatest representative of Israel. Because he lives, they live. The resurrection of Yeshua is the resurrection of Israel. And the gathering of Jacob and the restoration of Israel is going on even now, day by day, moment by moment. And they are like the jewels in the garment of the bride. The children you thought you had lost shall yet say in your hearing, "This place is too crowded for me. Make room for me to settle." Divine discipline has brought about this joyous restoration. Can you see it? What is your reaction to it? These are general questions. Perhaps the question should actually be asked to the United Nations or individually to the leaders of formerly Christian nations. Psalm 18:22 through 23 says this: "The stone the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our sight." That stone is in Jerusalem. Amen. Let's see, I covered a lot of ground. Let me see if I can summarize this quickly. I hope that I made the case that the words of Ikev and Isaiah 49 and the text of the Gospels regarding Yeshua are all tightly linked together. Along the way, perhaps we have now a better understanding of the relationship of our identity to each other and to God. No matter which flock we come from, we're all in one flock. Perhaps we have a better idea of the Son's identity. You see, it's not just this one the world calls Jesus standing alone. He is representative of all Israel. He's the one who suffered for Israel, just as the temple had to in Jerusalem. And I hope that now we understand that discipline, the destruction of the temple, was not God breaking his relationship. It was the discipline of a father to the son. The same discipline that Yeshua had to take on for us. And that's the role it has in the mission of the Messiah. And I hope that we now understand that, again, no matter which fold we came from, we are now joined in to God's Am Segulah, his treasured people. And that because Yeshua received God's discipline on behalf of Israel and behalf of all those grafted into Israel, now the redemption of mankind can proceed to its great and glorious future.